Welcome back to another, I don't know if it's performance based, but we have a task. So maybe I won't label this as PBQ. Um, Maybe I will. I don't know. So this is the second video I'm making this morning. We're going to talk about network address translation, and we're going to talk about private versus public IP or IPv4 addressing. So when you configure network address translation or you need to modify it in some way, you definitely need to know these concepts. So before we begin the task, let's just talk about it a little bit. So how familiar are you with this? Do you know what a private IP address is? Do you know what a public IP address is? What do these numbers mean? So if you have a good idea, we can continue the video. If you're not quite sure, then we should rewind a bit and go back. Okay, so on the right, we can see what IP addresses are public and what are private. So I've seen a lot of 10 dot networks, especially in businesses. It's pretty common. For medium-sized companies, Class B is fine, but the most common one, especially in a home network, is Class C, or most commonly is starting with 192. So that's better for smaller companies, and you can have more numbers of networks, but not so many hosts. Okay, I had a command prompt open. I guess I closed it. So let's get that open. So what about us? Let's take a real life example. Let's forget about these pictures for a second. So what is the IP address that I have on this computer? Our famous IP config tells us that. So I'm on a 192 network like I was talking about. So it's very, very common for smaller networks in 12.51. Okay, so that's my gateway. But all of this information that I get from IP config is private. What about my public information? What's beyond my firewall? How do people connect to me? Or how do I know it's routing and going out? There's so many ways to check your public IP address. I just have been using IP chicken for so long that I'll make it famous today. And this is my IP address, 172.56.121.88. And that would be, yeah, is it private? So it's a little funny. Not what I expected to see. Anywho, yeah, I wasn't sure if that was a public or private IP address. It caught my eye, and I'm really looking at it now. Yeah, I guess it ranges from 128 and 172. It could be public, but I have seen a handful that are private that start with 172. Oh, it cuts off at 31. See how inexperienced I am with IP addresses. So it confused me a bit there. But you got the concept. We have a private IP address, which is my 192 address right here that I got. Okay, and then we have a public IP address, which is a 172, all these advertisements. Okay, good. So those are what are in my network. What about you? What's your network? What's your private IP address? What's your public IP address? Can we put this into practice? Okay, so that 172 address would be my router. But I need to go beyond my router. I need to access a server. Maybe this is a website server. Maybe it's some sort of remote desktop server. It could be all kinds of different things. This is how network address translation works. It's able to route it correctly from the firewall and send it to the server that it needs to go to. And it knows that the server will eventually hit this firewall again and send it back. So it sees the IP address of the router in the routing table, and it knows to go back. And then once it safely arrives at the router, then it will forward that to whatever host that has that IP address. Okay, so now we have this translation essentially figured out. Cool. Let's do the task. Log into a router and verify network translation is configured. So I have a little exercise here, this one. So our famous gateway, right? We were just talking, it's such a common gateway for home networks and small networks. 1.1. Okay, Linksys. Yeah, there's plenty of Linksys switches and routers. Oh, this one's a router, actually. The Netgear one we logged into last time was a switch. So this is a router. You're going to see this more on routers than switches. Like we just did a VLAN video. That's going to have more switches, and routers were going to have network address translation and routing and all that. Okay, so we'll go to config and we'll go to advanced routing. Oh yeah, it doesn't really have anything about NAT anywhere else. Okay, and this is disabled. You can see other routing protocols and static routing. So when you think of network address translation, just think of the routing area in your firewall in your router. Okay, so I just enabled it. So now the internet should work. It should connect and start translating. So sometimes that gets disabled by like a careless mistake, but you will need to know that eventually for your network plus exam and how that works. Thank you for watching.